is ECMO or European Certified Medical Oncologist. And Sir is very well known for his in-depth knowledge about trials, evidences, and we all respect him a lot for his in-depth knowledge. And anyone ask any trial anytime, he can discuss all those trials with hazard ratio and inclusion exclusion criteria and whatnot. So whenever we discuss about this year-end review, Sir is like our automatic choice for these talks. Thank you so much, Sir, for accepting our another invitation. And just one small clarification, Oncology Classroom is not involved in any kind of financial or anything like that. Neither do we accept any financial help from anyone. Neither any pharma company is involved in this. Neither our esteemed teachers or faculties get any kind of financial benefit from this. So it's our academic interest which is motivating us and which is driving us towards continuing these sessions. And we'll be definitely continuing this in future as well without any kind of financial implication with anyone. There should not be any kind of financial interest in this. So Oncology Classroom does not believe in having financial affiliation with pharma companies. So with this, I think, Sir, I should now stop and request you to please start your presentation.
Right. Thank you so much for your kind words. And I'll share my screen now. So I just love to do the year-end review. Sorry, I don't know what did I do. Yeah. My slides are visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And are they moving as well?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I love to do year-end review. That gives me a chance to review whatever has been published and presented in various meetings in the last year. And this year-end review is slightly peculiar because I've covered not only 2020, but also covered 2019. So the year-end review today would be about genitourinary cancers. And we'll be discussing non-prostate because the prostate is a totally separate ball game. And we'll start with kidney cancers. So coming to the early stage and adjuvant therapies in kidney cancer, early stage RCC. So we had one publication of percutaneous cryoablation versus partial or radical nephrectomy for early stage kidney cancer. What they tried to do in this is whether you can avoid surgery or radical nephrectomy for a small lesion that is early stage kidney cancer. And they found that percutaneous cryoablation yielded a 10-year disease-specific survival rate of 94%, which is comparable to partial or radical nephrectomy. So there is an option, especially in patients who have a single kidney or they have kidney tumors in both the kidneys. This is one technique wherein percutaneous cryoablation can be used as a treatment modality for a very small RCC. And 10-year disease-specific survival is around 94%, which seems to be as good as with partial or radical nephrectomy. So I thought that this is an important study. So one can quote this study. The next is the adjuvant sorafenib. Now we have got almost 5 randomized controlled trials for high-risk, intermediate or high-risk kidney cancers which have been operated upon as adjuvant therapies, sorafenib. And this is coming from the SOURCE trial, which is published in JCO 2020. Both disease-free survival and overall survival were not improved by adjuvant TKI. So perhaps this is the 5th study in line, other than the ASTRAC study, which showed a DFS of 5.5 months versus 6.6 months, almost a 1-year increase in disease-free survival, and is registered as a category 2B indication in NCCN about sunitinib. This sorafenib study was a negative study and did not improve disease-free survival or overall survival in the entire cohort of patients. Another study of similar nature, adjuvant pazopanib. We know that adjuvant pazopanib has been tested after nephrectomy in the PROSPER study, but not in the PROSPER, in another study, but this is after metastatectomy. So this is a study of adjuvant pazopanib after metastatectomy of renal cell carcinoma. Say, for example, a patient has undergone a nephrectomy and has a solitary lung lesion, say about a year later, and has undergone a metastatectomy, whether you give them adjuvant therapy or not. In this ECOG 2810 trial, the adjuvant pazopanib did not result into any improvement in disease-free survival. As a matter of fact, there was a detrimental effect. The trial did not show benefit. In fact, there was shorter lifespan with adjuvant pazopanib in this particular study. Another study of adjuvant pazopanib, which was the proper study, and that study also did not show any benefit of pazopanib. So sunitinib is the only drug which has shown a DFS benefit with no overall survival benefit in the adjuvant setting when given for 1 year, called as the STRAC study, which was an NEJM publication. Other than that, all studies have been negative. Now, coming to the metastatic renal cell carcinoma, clear cell first line, not non-clear, but only clear cell first line. So this is an old study, but was published in JAMA in 2019. It is a third-time study, a randomized controlled trial of whether you can defer cytoreductive nephrectomy in a metastatic setting, and give sunitinib first or do cytoreductive nephrectomy upfront. The overall study was negative. However, the study did show that the disease-free survival or the progression-free survival actually did not improve by giving sunitinib first. Their hypothesis was that if you give sunitinib first, you will improve the progression-free survival. It was not improved, as you can see in this Kaplan-Meier curve. They were bang on same, but the overall survival was in favor of deferring the nephrectomy. So patients should defer nephrectomy and do nephrectomy after receiving a response. And the authors hypothesized that pre-treatment with sunitinib may identify those patients who have inherent resistance to systemic therapy before they are planned for a cytoreductive nephrectomy, and it can help you choose your patient carefully for a cytoreductive nephrectomy. So ideally, we know that the Carmina study is already there for intermediate and high-risk patients. Patients should not undergo nephrectomy, a cytoreductive nephrectomy. Rather, they should undergo sunitinib or TKI-based therapy. One study of, we know that it's time for immunotherapy, and immunotherapy has come as first-line therapies in metastatic RCC clear cell. So this is a atezo plus bev therapy called as the IMMotion 151. The study met its one of the co-primary endpoints of progression-free survival of improving it from 7.7 months to 11.2 months with a hazard ratio of 0.74. If you can kindly remember the hazard ratio, it's 0.74. But the median overall survival was not very great. It is 0.93 and did not cross the significance boundary. So you don't really see this option coming up in the NCCN guidelines as a treatment option. One of the NEJM publication in March 2019 is avelumab plus exitinib. It is the Javelin Renal 101 study. The primary endpoint of this study was progression-free survival in the PD-L1 positive population and also in the overall population. And it did meet its primary endpoint. And the primary endpoint, progression-free survival, improved from 7.2 months with sunitinib versus 13.8 months with avelumab plus exitinib. And the hazard ratio over here is 0.61. Mind you, in IMMotion 151, the hazard ratio was 0.74. So it is definitely a better hazard ratio than what was seen in the IMMotion study. So exitinib plus avelumab is something which is there. The confirmed response rates was in excess of 50%, and which was about 25% with sunitinib alone. And there were about complete responses were less than 5%. So less than 5% complete responses. This is important to understand because we have competing standards of care, and we need to know these response rates, complete response rates, PFS, and the hazard ratios of the PFS and the overall survival. The study still is not mature for overall survival, so I'm not quoting the overall survival, but the overall population and PD-L1 positive population had very similar hazard ratios, and the progression-free survival is sitting at around 13.8 months. So Pembro plus exitinib, which is the Keynote 0426 study, versus sunitinib was another study which was published in NEJM in 2019. The progression-free survival and overall survival were co-primary endpoints, and they were met. The hazard ratio is 0.69, again, much better than what was seen with IMMotion 151. The overall survival endpoint was also met with a significant hazard ratio. As you can see that the overall survival was improved for all subtypes, but for the favorable subtype, it was crossing the unity line. And the response rates were 59.3%, which is much better than sunitinib. So we are looking at a response rate with, when you combine immunotherapy with TKI, we are looking at a response rate sitting between 55 and 60%. But look at the complete response rate, it's again 5%, 5.8% is the complete response rate. The extended follow-up was published in Lancet Oncology 2020 of the same Keynote 426 study. They looked at the earlier follow-up was about 24 months. Now it is 30 months, and they showed that it continues to show that there is a betterment in the progression-free survival and overall survival. As you can see, that the overall survival is not really improving much for patients who have favorable prognosis. The overall survival is crossing the unity line, but for those who have intermediate intermediate or high risk disease, the overall survival is better and the progression-free survival is also better. Now, so we have competing standard of care. We have for favorable risk, we can either give sunitinib, pazopanib, or we can give axitinib plus pembrolizumab. But for poor risk, we have Nivo-EP versus axitinib and pembro. Nivo-EP was an old study from the Checkmate 214 study. So it's very important that we compare the two studies, the Keynote 426 and the Checkmate 214 study. So look at the progression-free survival curves. Now we have follow-up data of Checkmate 214 for 42 months. And look at the curve. It is not falling down. It's blocked at 35%. So perhaps you have cured 35% patients with advanced RCC. Well, the curve at 24 months follow-up, it is sitting at 34%, almost same. But the curve seems to be falling down with pembro plus XZ, whereas with Nivo-EP, it's definitely the follow-up is longer and more reconciling, I would say, at 35%, and the curve doesn't seem to be falling down. There's no patient who's progressing beyond that time. So from 37% at 30 months, it's 35% at 42 months. So even at 12 months of follow-up, the curve is not falling down. So perhaps these patients are cured. That is exactly what you want from an immuno-oncology drug in RCC, that you are perhaps treating them forever and you're curing them. So the overall survival curves looks to be very same at 24 months mark. We can see that at 30 months, 60%, and over here it is 69% overall survival. So it seems to be same, almost same. At 24 months, I assume it will be around 65%. So it looks to be very same between the two studies, the 214 and the Keynote 426. But we know that Nivo-EP is a dangerous protocol. We know that ipilimumab leads to a lot of immune responses and immune reactions. So ipilimumab will lead on to a lot of patients who will discontinue treatment. But even if you were to discontinue treatment on Nivo-EP, look at the dark green Kaplan-Meier curve, you find that these patients also tend to do very well, because it's 66% 42 months overall survival versus 56% who in the intention to treat population. So even if you were to discontinue because of side effects, you tend to do well with the Nivo-EP combination. So these are the hazard ratios put together. We know that we are looking at a response rate of about 55% with pembro-XZ, which is around 42% in the intermediate poor risk group of metastatic RCC. The favorable, the progression-free survival is 13.9 months versus 20.8 months. So definitely Nivo-EP is not meant for the favorable risk group and in terms of progression-free survival. But for the intermediate poor risk, we have almost very similar hazard ratios, 0.76 and 0.69. Whereas for the overall survival, intermediate and poor risk group, we have 0.66 and 0.63. So very similar hazard ratios between Nivo-EP and pembro-XZ. And I would say that we have a longer follow-up with Nivo-EP. So perhaps this can be slightly more favored till the time we have more follow-up data with pembro-XZ. Lenvatinib plus pembro is another combination which is being looked at. So this is one publication from JCO which looked at not only RCC, urothelial malignancies, but other malignancies too. And this was marked as one of the practice-changing papers of Lenva plus pembro for all types of patients, including endometrial cancers, irrespective of their MSI high status or low status. And it did register that the overall response rate is around 70%. I told you that pembro-XZ shows a response rate of about 55-58%. Now we are seeing a response rate of 70%, which is quite high. And progression-free survival was sitting around 15 months or so, which is 19.8 months with lenvatinib plus pembrolizumab. So this is one combination which I'll definitely look out for in a randomized phase 3 study for RCC. In urothelial malignancies, we are looking at a response rate of around 25% with this combination. So this is something which can be looked at. So this is a smaller phase 2 study, but nonetheless, this is worth mentioning. In this very ISMO meeting, we had Nivo plus cabozantinib, called as a Checkmate 9 ER trial, very exciting trial, which randomized patients to Nivo plus cabozantinib versus sunitinib. So something similar to Pembro-Exe, but now this time it is Nivo and Cabo versus sunitinib. And look at the progression-free survival. It is hazard ratio is 0.51. This is the best hazard ratio we have seen. The progression-free survival is sitting at 16.6 months. Although in the Lenva plus pembrolizumab, the PFS was around 20 months, but that was a very small study. This is a randomized controlled trial. And we look at progression-free survival of 16.6 months with a very impressive hazard ratio of 0.51. Earlier, we have had a hazard ratio of 0.6. The overall survival hazard ratio is 0.60, which was 0.63 with Pembro-Exe, so very similar hazard ratios. But yes, the overall survival and PFS are both met. Smaller phase 2 study of cabozantinib plus atezolizumab registered overall response rate in excess of 60%. And they did find that the PD-L1 status of the CD8 positivity did result into very good response rates. So they could have some biomarkers in this particular trial, which found that the response rates can increase to almost 88% when you have a PD-L1 positive status. And if you have CD8 positive T cells, your response rate is sitting at around 79%. And if you have both, it is around 86%. So perhaps we are looking at some biomarker studies wherein you can select your therapies accordingly. So this is another very interesting BioNIC study which was published in ISMO. It was an oral presentation in ISMO, which is looking at biomarkers and immune signatures. So they classified the metastatic RCC into immune low, immune high, angio high, or normal like, and they randomized patients of immune high and low to Nivo or Nivo EP, whereas angio high were randomized to Nivo EP versus TKI. And what they found in this particular study is that if you have a immune high disease, Nivo alone is enough. You don't need to add ipilimumab to it. But if you have an immune low disease, you need to add Nivo and DP. But if you have a TKI high or angio high tumor, you are good with TKI alone. As simple as that. So perhaps these immune signatures and angio signatures will come in to choose your therapies. And this looks to be the future, although this is not ready for prime time. A very important paper, interesting paper, von Hippel-Lindau is sometimes mutated. We know that it's a genetic mutation, but sometimes it can be a somatic mutation in RCC. But those patients who have a genetic mutation of von Hippel-Lindau, or they have hypoxia-inducible factor upregulated in them. So this is a HIF2A inhibitor called as a MK6482. And it showed the complete response rate, confirmed response rates of around 30%, and unconfirmed responses which were included was around 41%, and with 86% patients having some decrease in the disease. So almost a disease reduction in almost 86% patients with this new drug called as the HIF2A inhibitor called as MK6482. So this is likely to be developed further. One interesting study linked between the bacterial the bacteria or the microbiome in the gut and outcomes with metastatic kidney cancer, especially in respect to immunotherapy. So they found that those patients who have more diverse microbial environment in the gut tend to do better with immunotherapy, and this is specific to a specific bacterium called as Akkermansia muciniphylla. And they found that those patients who have high microbial burden, they tend to do better with immunotherapy. Now, coming to metastatic renal cell carcinoma, non-clear cell second line. So we know that all these patients do relapse. This is one of the very important papers, although a negative study, but still quoted as a very important paper. This is individualized axitinib regimen for patients with metastatic RCCs, especially in respect to second-line therapy. So this was heavily pretreated population. You can see that they had received all forms of immunotherapy. And what they said is that you individualize the dose of axitinib. So the starting dose of axitinib is 5 milligram BD, but you keep increasing every 14 days by adding 1 milligram BD. that is 6 milligram BD, then going to 7 milligram BD, and then 8 milligram up to 10 milligram BD. So they could escalate the dose in almost 60% of the patients. And this is because axitinib is very peculiar and very different from the other TKIs. It is more specific, and it has less off-target effects. So you can actually escalate the dose of axitinib. Don't keep the patient on 5 milligram BD. And if you do that, their ballpark figure for PFS was around 6.5 months, and they hypothesized that it will reach 9.5 months, but they could reach 8.5 months as the PFS. So overall, it was a negative study, but it did bring in that you can actually improve on axitinib efficacy by increasing or individualizing the doses and increasing the doses and try to reach up to 10 milligram BD. So additionally, the novel dosing scheme in this study provides a clinically relevant framework to guide optimal dosing of axitinib in metastatic RCC, and this is in respect to second-line therapy. Another important study published in Lancet was tivozanib versus sorafenib in multiply treated third or fourth line therapies. And tivozanib outperformed sorafenib in terms of progression-free survival, both for patients who have received or not received immunotherapy. So these are the two PFS curves. Overall survival was not very different, but the PFS was the primary endpoint of this particular study. Of course, since we are throwing everything but the kitchen sink at patients right up front in metastatic RCC, so what are you left with when they progress? And that is the question that comes to your mind. So if you have exposed your patient to Pembro-Exe, then what do you give at the time of progression? So these are two papers of immunotherapy re-challenge, and they found that if especially patients who have had a response to immunotherapy upfront, and if you re-challenge these patients to immunotherapy again, you have 37 to 23% chance of a response between ICI1 and ICI2. So the likelihood of a response was greatest for those patients who had earlier response to IC1, immune checkpoint inhibitors 1. And although they did found that those patients who had the best response as progressive disease to IC1, they still could get a response. That is around 20% of these patients could get a response. Another paper, which was a JCO publication 2020 of salvage nivo-ipi in patients who have previously received an immune checkpoint inhibitor, be it PD-1 inhibitor, PD-L1 inhibitor, and even if they had a progressive disease as the best response to the prior immune checkpoint inhibitors, they had 22% probability of getting a response even for progressive disease. And if they had a PR to their previous immune checkpoint inhibitor, there is a 17% chance that they can actually have a response again. And they had a stable disease as the best response, then 25% chance. So nivo-ipi is something which can be thought of as a re-challenge, effective salvage option for patients who have metastatic RCC and have received previous PD-1 or PD-L1 inhibitor. Of course, this needs to be tested in a randomized controlled trial, but this is the information that we have as of now. Now, coming to therapy in metastatic non-clear cell RCC. So we have one paper from in Lancet Oncology from cabozantinib, which had patients from chromophobe type, collecting duct type tumors. We know that collecting duct carcinomas are very bad, papillary, unclassified. So you can see that all of these tumors had some response. In fact, collecting duct carcinomas, one of the patients, the red line, almost had a good overall survival and perhaps the best PFS. So collecting duct carcinomas had an overall response rate of 50%. Papillary and everybody else had almost in the tune of ballpark figure being around 30% response rates. And all these patients were previously treated with immunotherapy, tyrosine kinase inhibitor, and so on and so forth. So up till now, in non-clear cell histology, we had only one randomized controlled trial called the ASPEN study, which was again a Lancet Oncology publication. They randomized patients to sunitinib and everolimus, and sunitinib was the better arm. Over here now we have cabozantinib, which is showing good impressive response rates. Another study of pembrolizumab seems to be active in non-clear cell kidney cancers, with overall response rates being around 33%, especially in PD-L1 high tumors, whereas in PD-L1 low tumors, it was around 10% only, so not very impressive, but this is coming from the Keynote 427 cohort B. Another study called the SAVOR trial, which is savolitinib versus sunitinib in MET-driven. We know that in papillary renal cell carcinoma, MET is upregulated in about 30%, 20 to 30% of papillary renal cell carcinomas, and they randomized these patients to savolitinib versus sunitinib. Savolitinib being a MET inhibitor, a specific MET inhibitor, and it outperforms sunitinib in terms of PFS and overall survival. So these are the waterfall plots. You can see that savolitinib is producing more responses and is superior in overall survival. Calypso trial was a combination of savolitinib plus durvalumab in metastatic papillary renal cell carcinoma. The median progression-free survival was 5.3 months. That was almost similar to what we had in the earlier study, the Savoy trial, where again savolitinib alone was also 5.3 months. I'm not very sure how much was a contribution by durvalumab, but nonetheless, this is the trial that we had. The atezo-bev people also looked at the responses in patients who have sarcomatoid features in their metastatic RCC, and they did find that, and this was not only sarcomatoid features but also non-clear cell histologies, and they found that the overall response rate is around 33%, and it could increase to 50% if they were PD-L1 positive by their biomarker. And in the sarcomatoid variant, they found that the response rate is around 26%. The PFS was around 8.3 months. So these are certain drugs which may work in patients who have otherwise difficult to treat population. Last word on sarcomatoid histology, the Checkmate 214 study, which used Nivo-AP. Just read this. The objective response rate in patients who have sarcomatoid features, RCC in the Checkmate 214, had an objective response rate of 56% and a complete response rate of around 18.3%. So my first choice of therapy for a sarcomatoid histology would be a Checkmate 214 protocol, that is Nivo-AP combination, because that is where you find an 18.3% complete response rate and perhaps the best response rates. All these are derived data, but there's no standard of care still. But I think this is where we are. Coming to the bladder cancer, starting from the early locoregional disease, this is one paper published in Clinical Cancer Research. This is about exfoliated cell DNA whole genome sequencing. This is called as EuroCAD, and they compared with urine cytology. So this is for early detection of tumors, and they found that the overall sensitivity was 80.4% and the specificity was 94.9%. The sensitivity was much better than the cytology, the routinely done cytology, but the specificity was almost similar. So EuroCAD is it's said to be quite cheap, and it's not very expensive to do low coverage whole genome sequencing in urine exfoliated cell DNA. Once the patient has undergone bladder resection, generally they are subjected to BCG and cystoscopy surveillance. And this is one paper which was actually a poster discussion where surveillance cystoscopy was compared, high intensity versus low intensity was compared head to head. And they found that low intensity was for 2 years, you undergo only less than 5 cystoscopies versus more than 6 cystoscopies. And the probability of bladder cancer death, which is on the Y chart, was gauged. They did not really find that if you do less intense cystoscopic checks, there was no increase in the probability of bladder cancer death. So this particular poster presentation was found to be potentially practice changing. So they say that there's a strong clinical rationale to do a clinical trial on the justification of doing repeated cystoscopies. So I would suggest that it's not practice changing, but perhaps if somebody is not able to come in COVID era, perhaps it's fine not to do very stringent cystoscopies. This is one paper published in Lancet Oncology about primary chemoablation of low-grade upper tract urothelial cancers. We know that low-grade upper tract urothelial cancers generally would demand a nephrectomy because you can't really do BCG or you can't really do anything else other than TURBT, so they will require a nephroureterectomy. And over here, this paper is about mitomycin-containing reverse thermal gel called as the Olympus phase 3 trial. And they found that the complete response rate, so they used to go retrograde and then inject this gel into the urinary tract. And they found that the complete response rate is 59%. And those who had a complete response rate, they seem to be quite durable over a follow-up. So UGN-101, the authors concluded that primary chemoablation of low-grade upper tract urothelial malignancies with intracavitary UGN-101 results into clinically significant disease eradication and might offer a kidney-sparing treatment alternative to these patients. We all know that upper tract urothelial malignancies are treated like bladder cancers, but this is one trial of adjuvant chemotherapy, randomized trial, phase 3 trial of upper tract urothelial malignancies published in Lancet Oncology called as the POUT trial. And this randomized patients after resection to chemotherapy versus no chemotherapy, and they found that the disease-free survival of surveillance was inferior to doing chemotherapy with cisplatin or gemcitabine or carboplatin gemcitabine, depending on the GFR. So was the metastasis-free survival. So we have now at least one randomized controlled trial of upper tract urothelial malignancies, wherein post-surgery one would subject them to clinical to chemotherapy. In the same regard, there's some work going on atezolizumab as adjuvant atezolizumab after surgery, but this particular study didn't really find any difference in the rate of disease-free survival or either in the PD-L1 positive population or PD-L1 negative population or anything. So this was a negative study called as IMvigor 010. This was done by Maha Hussain. One paper for radiation oncologist, I think this is an important paper. So this was gemcitabine and daily radiation versus cisplatin 5-FU and twice daily radiation. So the 5-year distant metastasis-free rate was 70% for 5-FU cisplatin and twice daily radiation versus 77% for gemcitabine and once daily radiation. And the 3-year bladder intact distant metastasis-free rate was 67% versus 72.5%. So it appears that gemcitabine plus radiation can be a treatment option, and this was the NRG RTOG 712 study. A lot of work going on again on PD-L1 and CTLA4 inhibitors in the neoadjuvant setting, the immunotherapy, and especially in cisplatin ineligible operable high-risk urothelial malignancies. They found that if you give it before the surgery, you can find that the pathological complete responses is to the tune of 37.5%, and 58% patient will have downstaging of the disease to T1 or lesser. So this is something which is an important study, and this was done with durvalumab and tremelimumab. Keynote 57 was a practice-changing study, and it was the phase 2 trial of pembrolizumab in patients who have high-risk non-muscle invasive bladder cancer and are not responsive to BCG. And this became a practice-changing paper and got an US FDA approval of pembrolizumab based on the Keynote 57. They found that those patients who were non-responsive to BCG and their only option was to undergo a bladder resection, they could have a CR rate of around 38.8%, and at follow-up, most patients, that is 72 to 75% patient, could maintain their CR, that is complete remission. So pembrolizumab can bring in a complete response in about 30 to 40% patients, and most of these patients will maintain their response. So one can have a bladder preservation approach by giving them pembrolizumab, which is an immune therapy. Coming to advanced disease, first-line treatment, the most practice-changing paper is the Javelin Bladder 100 study. After chemotherapy for a metastatic urothelial cancer, that is with gem and cisplatin or gem plus carboplatin, they were randomized to avelumab, which is immunotherapy versus control, and they found that the median overall survival increased from 14 months to 21.4 months for the PD-L1 positive as well as the overall population. It was improved with an impressive hazard ratio. So was the progression-free survival. They tried to have a biomarker analysis, which was published in ISMO, and they found that tumor mutation burden was also quite predictive. So was the encoding region for high affinity FC segment of the immune cells, and even that was quite predictive. So was the immune or the gene signature, the immunogene signature of Javelin, and T cell inflamed tumors or 18 gene signature could predict that those patients who have high signatures, they can benefit from avelumab. These are exploratory, not practice-changing, but this is where the research is going. A smaller study of maintenance pembrolizumab in the same regard as avelumab showed that the progression-free survival improves, although the overall survival did not improve because there was almost 50% patients were crossover to pembrolizumab at the time of progression. And they also showed that the overall response rates kept on improving if you give pembrolizumab. So this is another study of switch maintenance like avelumab, but much smaller study. In this very small, there were phase 3 studies of replacing chemotherapy with immunotherapy. And the Danube study was published, which was randomization to chemotherapy versus durvalumab or durvalumab plus temolizumab, which are immune therapies, immune checkpoint inhibitors, either PD-L1 or PD-L1 plus CTLA-4 inhibitor. And the co-primary endpoint was overall survival in patient with durvalumab versus chemotherapy in PD-L1 high population. The trial did not meet its primary endpoint and the p-value was non-significant. Also, durva plus temolizumab in the overall population was not very significant, although numerically the overall survival was in favor of durvalumab and temolizumab, but the trial was a total failure. However, they did find that those patients who were PD-L1 high and received durva and temolizumab, which was a secondary endpoint, did improve the overall survival from 12.91 months to 17.9 months. But then that was a secondary analysis. So overall, the study was negative, but it did show that patients who perhaps are platinum ineligible, this may be one of the options, but this was not how the study was planned. IMvigor 130 was an old study where they combined atezo plus chemotherapy versus chemotherapy alone. And they did find that the progression-free survival is in favor of atezo plus chemo versus placebo and chemo. And this time they published the patient-reported outcomes, and they found that for role function, social function, and time to deterioration of quality of life, atezo plus chemotherapy had better outcomes as compared to chemotherapy alone. Another failure study, pembrolizumab plus chemotherapy versus pembrolizumab alone, called as the Keynote 361 study. And again, the statistical values are put over here. Although you will find that the p-value is significant, but it did not meet this boundary, which was pre-planned boundary of 0.001. It was 0.003, so it was actually a negative study. So pembro plus chemo versus chemo did not meet its primary endpoint. The progression-free survival did improve numerically, but did not reach the pre-specified significance value. Overall survival, again, you will find that the p-value is 0.04, which is significant, but it was supposed to be 0.0142. So it was all in all a negative study. The combination with pembrolizumab and chemotherapy did not result into improvement. Only the IMvigor 130 was positive, but it is not yet FDA approved. Keynote 5.2 was first-line pembrolizumab alone in cisplatin ineligible patients. So it was a single-arm study. It did show that the overall response rate sits at around 28%, 30% or so, whereas in patient who has CPS score high, it is around 50%, and those who have CPS score low, it is around 20%. And that is the reason the US FDA approved pembrolizumab in platinum ineligible patients, irrespective of the PD-L1 status. But you can see that those who have high PD-L1, they tend to do better as compared to those who have lesser PD-L1 expression. So if we put together all this data, we know that 361 Danube study, but both negative studies of combination of immunochemo versus chemotherapy alone, or IO versus chemotherapy alone, both were negative studies, and the response rates are not looking very favorable. It is looking at around 50% to 36%. But even in the IMvigor study, the overall response rate was around 47%. Although this tended to be a significant study, but I think the best way is still the Javelin 100 bladder study, where switch maintenance with avelumab seems to be doing the best with a significant hazard ratio. If you look at IO mono versus chemo, that is the 361 pembro alone arm or the Danube arm of durvalumab alone, we know that there are certain patients who are progressing very fast. So perhaps this is the area where one needs to be careful. So we need to have a biomarker of response, which was tested in the IMvigor 130 study. So perhaps in PD-L1 positive population, you can see that there is some improvement. So IO monotherapy is only meant for PD-L1 positive population. As a desperate measure, one may use it for PD-L1 negative also, but that is where the data is. So one very interesting study of proton pump inhibitors, perhaps this needs to be one of the factors to be factored in patients who are randomized in these studies, because this particular study shows that those patients who are taking proton pump inhibitors and are receiving immunotherapy, they tend to do poorly. The PPI use was associated with a significantly worse overall survival. and PFS with atezolizumab, but not chemotherapy. So this is something, an important factor, because most of our patients are on PPIs. So this is the simple status as on September 2020. If you have a patient who is platinum eligible, you need to see whether you can give cisplatin or carboplatin. If you can give cisplatin, well and good. Otherwise, gem carbo is the second best option. And then you have a switch maintenance with avelumab, because none of the therapies, neither the Danube study nor the Keynote 361 or the IMvigor 130 has shown a significant survival benefit of combining immunotherapy and chemotherapy or immuno-IO drug. But if you have a platinum ineligible patient, but if they are PD-L1 positive, IO monotherapy is good enough. If you have a PD-L1 negative population, I would perhaps prefer to use, although there is no approval, of IO-IO combination, durvalumab, tremelimumab, something like that, or one can take to best supportive care alone. Coming to second line and beyond, erdafitinib is a new molecule. It's a FGFR inhibitor, which was published in New England Journal of Medicine in the BLC 2001 study. And most of these patients were heavily pretreated. About 20% patients are FGFR altered. As a matter of fact, in patients who have upper tract urothelial malignancies, about 37% have FGFR mutations. And the progression-free survival was 5.5 months versus median overall survival was 13.8 months. I have treated one patient with erdafitinib. It is a fairly toxic drug. It causes stomatitis, diarrhea, dry mouth. It also causes paronychia, a lot of nail changes and blurring of vision and nail dystrophy and urinary tract infection. So it's not an easy drug to handle. One exciting study of sacituzumab govitecan, we know that there was a practice-changing paper in breast cancer called the ASCENT study of sacituzumab govitecan in triple-negative breast cancer. So TROPHY U101 study is another study in urothelial malignancies where sacituzumab govitecan is being tested for metastatic urothelial carcinoma. This drug targets the TROP2, which is an epithelial surface antigen, which is highly expressed in urothelial malignancies. And the payload is SN38, which is a prodrug of irinotecan, which is linked to the TROP2 antibody with a linker. The overall response, the dose is 10 milligram per kg, day 1, day 8, every 21 days. It has toxicities of neutropenia, febrile neutropenia, diarrhea, and nausea, but response rate seems to be quite impressive, around 27% impressive response rates, and some CRs also. The median progression-free survival is 5.4 months, and overall survival is 10.5 months. And enfortumumab vedotin is another drug which is being tested and is approved for usage. It targets the Nectin-4, and Nectin-4 is upregulated in almost all patients of urothelial malignancies. The payload is MMAE, that is monomethyl auristatin E, which is linked to with a linker. So this particular drug, in patients who have previously had PD-L1 inhibitors and everything, the overall response rate seems to be very impressive, around 44%, with complete responses seen in about 12% patients. The common toxicities are fatigue, peripheral neuropathy, and alopecia, and decrease in appetite and dysgeusia. So I think it's a fairly well-tolerated drug otherwise. There are some data of enfortumab vedotin plus pembrolizumab combination, wherein the response rates have been registered to be around 71%, with 13% complete responses. So people are trying to combine immuno plus the new targeted therapies and all. Cabozantinib is another molecule which has been tested in platinum refractory metastatic urothelial malignancies, with overall response rates sitting at around 30% or so. And these are the waterfall plots and the spider plots. You can see that some responses can be really durable, and the median overall survival is 7.2 months. Not a very great drug, but then there is at least some option. The PL12 randomized control trial was testing nab-paclitaxel versus paclitaxel. People generally resort to nab-paclitaxel, but at least this particular study shows that there is hardly any improvement of nab-paclitaxel over paclitaxel. The response rates, everything seems to be very similar, including progression-free survival and overall survival. Hardly any change. As a matter of fact, numerically it is inferior with nab-paclitaxel. So in today's world, I think the option of first line and beyond in 2020 will be the first line metastatic urothelial malignancy will be GemCis, and if there's no progression, maintenance checkpoint inhibitors with avelumab. And if you have a patient who is cisplatin ineligible, You can choose carboplatin, or you can have checkpoint inhibitor, preferably either atezolizumab or pembrolizumab, because these are the two drugs approved. In second line, one should look out for erdafitinib, enfortumab vedotin, or sacituzumab govitecan. There's no biomarker for these drugs, although they target Nectin-4 and TROP2, but erdafitinib is only for FGFR mutated tumors. And this is my last slide, and I hope I have made everyone happy. Otherwise, you can see the answer. Thank you very much.
Great, sir, as always.